Well, what I know right now is that the top priority should be to end the genocide in Gaza. There is a genocide taking place. 13,000 children, more than 13,000, have been killed. You know, there's now something called wounded child, no surviving family in Gaza because of how many children are wounded with no surviving family. This has been a horror show in Gaza. Babies are being starved. Are we not watching the same videos? Are you all not seeing the mutilated children with amputated limbs crying without their parents?
But out of interest,
because of this ongoing slaughter?
I am horrified by those scenes, but I'm really curious why you cannot express any horror for what Hamas did, given it was the same, if not worse. And they proudly broadcast it.
Because I think
I don't understand why you would expect anybody. Hang on, let me ask you a question. Why would you expect anybody to express sympathy or empathy for what you're describing, given your utter refusal to express any for what Israelis went through on October the 7th? Explain.
You guys are using October 7th to justify a genocide. What are Palestinians justifying?
I'm not using it to justify anything. I'm simply
people have been slaughtered.
I'm not justifying
you're sitting here saying,
anything.
Me condemning. Hold on, Piers. Piers, you're saying you want me to condemn. You want me to condemn Hamas in order for you all to feel empathy for over 13,000 Palestinian children who have been slaughtered?
That's not what I said.
It's essentially what I'm hearing here.
No, you're not. You're not listening. Well, then listen harder.
I'm not going to sit here.
Listen more carefully.
I'm not going to sit here and condemn colonized people. I'm just not. It's not going to happen. You can sit here and try to twist your words to weaponize your condemnation.
But you keep talking about Israel. Okay, but you keep talking about Israel killing babies and children and so on, and that is indisputably happening. And yet you are completely incapable of condemning Hamas for doing the same thing.
Hamas carried out a military operation on October 7th.
It was an act
Israel
of terror.
Killed a lot of its own people,
a terrorist
which you all
attack.
Never talk about. Is it what Israel's doing in Gaza terrorism? Would you call that terrorism?
It's a response to an act of terrorism. There are many serious legitimate concerns about the scale of that response. I agree. And they will be held to account by international courts about whether they've committed war crimes.
Oh, will they?
But my issue is you don't give a damn what Hamas did to those innocent Israelis on October the 7th, do you? That's the heart of your position.
100 journalism professors at elite universities across the country are asking the New York Times to review their investigative reporting on October 7th. A lot of what we heard are lies. You don't talk about that on the show. Israeli media has reported on a lot of those lies too. Moreover, Piers, if you're going to say what Israel's doing is a response to October 7th, then could October 7th perhaps have been a response to what Israel's been doing to Palestinians, which nobody was covering on October 4th or October 5th or October 6th? What I hear here is no empathy for people undergoing a genocide. And I'm sitting here and you're asking me to condemn people who are fighting for their survival.
Actually, I'm just asking you. I'm actually just asking you to condemn an act of grotesque terrorism, and you're incapable of doing it.
I want to hear Emily and you and everybody on this panel condemn
Israel's incapable of showing a shred of empathy
terror
for anyone killed on the other side. That's my point.
You're incapable of showing a shred of empathy for Palestinians.
I've let you speak. Let me bring Elika Lebon back in. Elika, you tweeted on May the 8th. Seeing the images of the children crushed under the rubble in Rafah yesterday split my soul open. These innocent babies are dying gruesome deaths over things they can't control and because of sins they didn't commit. I don't know how, but a hostage return, permanent ceasefire, a disempowerment of Hamas deal desperately needs to happen now. Powerful words, but when you hear Thomas Hand, whose own 9-year-old daughter was kidnapped and held hostage and put through 50 days or more of horror, it's very easy to understand why people like him have such an implacable desire to eliminate Hamas, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned that in my tweet. I didn't just end it at, ceasefire and hostage return. I said that it's imperative to disempower Hamas. And, this is something that I think is really important to understand when we keep referring to Hamas as oppressed people. They're not oppressed people. We're talking about billionaires. We're talking about the heads of Hamas are billionaires, and they are being funded by the Islamic Republic, who are also billionaires, and they have been giving millions and millions and millions of dollars over time. This narrative about being oppressed people is Islamic Republic propaganda that is designed to target the Western left, because the Western left fall for this this false binary of oppressed and oppressor, and everyone has to support the oppressed. And there's no red line to what the oppressed can do. There's no red line to what the perceived oppressed can do. And so then you ask, like, how far does that go? You know, you talk about people in Iran who've been living under occupation for the past 45 years. Nobody has ever murdered children because of that. You talk about Nazi Germany. Jews didn't go around slaughtering children and innocent families because of that. It's not true that there's never been an observable pattern in history of human behavior that people who are oppressed resort to slaughtering women and children. Yes, it is true that sometimes they revolt against the entity that is doing that to them. And that is an argument that could have been made if we witnessed an uprising in the West Bank, for example, against the military border. Then you can say, okay, well, this seems to be an uprising, right? But when you're talking about Gaza, when you're talking about Hamas that are billionaires, that are very, very far from being oppressed, that are hosted and funded by some of the richest countries in the world, that is Islamic Republic propaganda to apologize for jihadism. And that very terrorism, and this is what I said, this is a vicious cycle, right? The more that there's terrorism, the more there's oppression. The more there's oppression, you know, and it's a vicious dance. So unless we're willing to get at the root of this, okay, if we don't want Palestinian people to be oppressed, we have to end this jihadism they're forcing them into oppression.
Well, I think we also have to end what has been a clear occupation that's gone on for a very long time. And it's a mutual thing, right? Yeah, the whole thing has to end. Thing. Yeah, I mean, both threats go at the same time.
Ultimately,
I want to see a state of Palestine, a state of Israel, living side by side in peace. I mean, that should be the end game. Exactly, by the way, in different circumstances, but actually similar in many ways too, what happened in Northern Ireland. You know, where they had decades and decades of terrorism on both sides, terrorists on both sides, actually in that conflict. And eventually, smart heads came together and they kept working at it until they got peace. And people in Northern Ireland live now in relative peace. And there are no acts of terrorism going on. Emily Schrader, let me ask you the same question that I asked Rania, which is this. You know, do you feel genuine empathy, sympathy with the people, the Palestinians, who are being killed in large numbers, the families of these babies, the families of these women, the innocent civilians caught up in this? Because there is a unique scenario in Gaza where half of the 2 million people that live there are under 18. We've never really had any war like this where, yes, you can absolutely have a moral justification for waging a response to what happened. I get that. But when you know that is the population demographic, when half the people there are under 18, they're kids, at what point do you stop and say, we've done what we need to do? We've dismantled Hamas to the point where they can no longer be a threat to us?
Well, the unfortunate reality is that we haven't dismantled Hamas to the point where they can no longer threaten us. And that is evidenced by the fact that they did fire rockets at Israeli civilians as well as Israeli soldiers, 4 of whom died from those attacks from their own humanitarian aid crossing. So that is the reality that we're still dealing with. In answer to your question about empathy, of course, I feel empathy for Palestinians. I don't think it's acceptable that any Palestinians should die, any Palestinian civilians, excuse me. I think it's a terrible, terrible travesty. I would love nothing more than actually what Elika wrote, which is that we should find a solution to bring home the hostages, find a way to end this war, and disband Hamas. And that is a very, very important objective, not just for the security of the state of Israel, but it's also an important objective for the Palestinians. As I mentioned at the beginning, Palestinians are being oppressed by Hamas. They have been for many years. And yes, we are dealing with a population that condones extremism. Unfortunately, there's way too much support for Palestinian terrorism and even for Hamas in both the West Bank and Gaza. But none of that changes the fact that they shouldn't be dying if they're innocent civilians. We don't want to see that. That is why numerous efforts have been made in order to prevent that. Now, has enough been done? I am not a military strategist. I can't answer that question definitively, but I do know that much care is being taken even today in order to avoid civilian casualties as much as possible. But again, we're dealing with an enemy that intentionally is endangering Palestinian civilians, which is all the more reason that this terrorist organization needs to be dismantled. They need to go. And we need to take a strong, united stance as an international community against this terrorism, because Hamas is not the only problem. Hamas is the beginning. And this is what I always speak about, is that the conflict isn't just between Israel and Hamas. It's between the jihadism, the terrorist organizations with the backing of the Islamic Republic of Iran and all of their proxies against the Western world and all of the values it stands for: freedom of speech, freedom of expression, feminism. It's much broader than just what we're seeing here.
Yeah,
and the main issue
there's
here
no doubt
is the Islamic Republic.
There is no doubt it is much broader. Finally, I want to go to you, Rania. I mean, do you accept that the leaders of Hamas are billionaires, or is that something else you refuse to believe?
You know what I see? I see a country called Israel that gets $3.8 billion
don't answer a different question.
a year.
Don't answer different
the-
questions. You've got a very weird way of, every time I ask you a simple question, you answer something completely different. I'm just asking you, do you accept?
Because you're trying to both sides it.
Well, you talked earlier that the whole
Do I
thing.
accept there's some rich people in Hamas?
Hang on. You
Yeah,
talked
does that
earlier.
mean
You
that-
talked earlier that October the 7th was entirely justified because it's oppressed people. And as
I didn't say that. You are putting words in my mouth. That is uncalled
If you
for.
don't condemn-
I'm trying to bring attention to a genocide.
Okay.
You know what? If the
Why don't- I
Holocaust
tell
were
you what,
happening
rather
right
than-
now,
rather
you
than
guys would be
telling me
sitting
what
here
we've all
having a
just heard you say,
conversation
right?
about-
All right. Well, let me. Okay. Let's just go through that then. So you don't think it was justified, October the 7th?
I am saying I refuse to play your condemnation
Was it just?
game, and I condemn
I
the
didn't
country
ask you
that
that.
my tax dollars
I just
go
asked
to,
you.
Piers.
Israel.
Israel.
Hang on. You just
I
said.
refuse to condemn
You just
Hamas.
said I
I'm
put
not going
words
to
in
keep
your
having
mouth.
this conversation with you.
You just said I put words in your
You
mouth.
did put words in my mouth.
Okay, so that's why I'm giving you the chance to set the record straight. Do you believe what happened on October the 7th was justified? Yes or no?
I believe it. I believe what happened on October 7th was a reaction to Israeli
Was it
terrorism.
justified?
That's what I believe. I'm not going to sit here and play a game about whether it was justified or not. That is not my place to talk about.
It was a terror attack.
I am here.
Do you believe it was
it is a game you're
justified?
playing. It's a distraction.
Was it justified?
You are trying to distract from
Why
an
don't you just answer the
ongoing
question?
genocide. You are trying to
Answer the
distract from an
question.
ongoing because I'm not playing that game.
It's not a
not my
game.
place to tell oppressed people what they. It's not my place to
So
justify
you now say
or
they are
unjustify
oppressed
something.
people. Okay.
Rania, I don't understand.
Okay, now hang on, Emily.
Hamas is
Emily, don't
oppressing
interrupt,
Palestinian
please.
people. Why
Emily,
would you side with them?
let me finish. So they're oppressed
You
people.
are justifying a genocide.
Sorry,
there is a
Rania,
genocide of Palestinians happening in Gaza
Rania,
right now.
You just
that
said,
is what I am here to talk about.
You just said they were oppressed people, which is what I said at the start. So do you believe that Hamas leaders are billionaires or not?
There's some Hamas leaders who have money. I don't know what that has to do with
billionaires?
the genocide in Gaza.
Are they billionaires?
I don't know why you're why is this the conversation? It's
where do they
crazy to me.
live?
There are like children being bombed
Where
right
do
now
they
by
live?
Israel
Where do they
with
live?
bombs supplied by my government.
Where do the Hamas billionaires live? The guys that run
Here's
Hamas.
where, I don't even understand. I really have no idea where you're going.
You
with
don't
this.
care,
I actually
do you?
don't know if there's a Hamas billionaire. I don't know if there's a Hamas billionaire, Piers. I just know that what you're doing right now is trying to distract from a genocide that Israel
actually,
is carrying out.
all I'm doing
Yes.
Yeah, all I'm actually doing is asking you very simple questions, and your failure to answer them is very illuminating.
My failure to answer if there's rich members of Hamas, what does that have to do with the genocide taking place in Gaza, Piers?
Oh,
are there
I would
billionaire
say,
Israelis?
I would say it's
that
got
doesn't change the
everything
fact
to
that
do.
Israel's carrying a.
Actually, it's got everything to do with a lot of it, actually, is that you have a bunch of rich billionaire terrorists leading Hamas, and they're not actually the oppressed people you're trying to paint them as. They are rich terrorists leading a terror group, and they don't even live in Gaza. They don't care about the lives of people in Gaza.
I know that, Piers, I know that I stand on the right side of history by opposing a genocide, and you are an accomplice to it by sitting here and propagandizing.
Whatever, you
for
can
a
use
terrorist
you can
genocidal
use all that
apartheid
bullshit.
state
You
of
can bullshit
Israel.
that stuff as much as you like, but
wow, this is incredibly aggressive. You guys can just sit here and bully me, but you're just a bunch of genocide
I'll give you
apologists.
one last chance to just answer a simple question. Do you think what happened on October the 7th was justified, yes or no?
Do you think Israel's ethnic cleansing and apartheid
Gave you the chance. You're not going to answer. Thank you all for coming on.
I'm giving you the chance, and you're not.
Thank you all for coming on Uncensored. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.